What if the very first woman mentioned after Eve carried a hidden message of honor and divine beauty? Not a queen, not a prophetess, not even the mother of a patriarch, yet her name was written down, kept alive, and whispered through generations. Her name was Adah, the first wife whose name appears in the Bible, the first female name after Eve. And yet, how many have ever stopped to wonder why her? Genesis 4 verse 19 records, Lamech took two wives, one named Adah, the other Zillah. A single verse. Just a mention. No miracle attached. No dramatic tale to follow. Yet God allowed her name to remain, while countless other women daughters, mothers, wives went unrecorded. Why? Consider it. In a world where lifespans stretched for centuries, where families multiplied like stars, why was Adah's name the one chosen, carved into Scripture, set into eternity? The Bible does not record names without meaning. Every preserved name carries significance, a signal for those who look deeper. Eve was the first woman. Sarah would later be called the mother of nations. But in the generations after Cain and Abel, while humanity was still finding its way, God chose to leave us with the name of Adah. Her name means ornament, adornment, beauty. That was no coincidence. Biblical names reveal identity, destiny, or character. Adah was not forgotten by God. She was adorned, not only with outward loveliness, but with the honor of remembrance. Many women gave birth then. Many tended homes, raised families, carried burdens. Yet only Adah's name glows from the pages of early Genesis. Could she point to something greater than herself? Perhaps a glimpse of dignity in an age of bloodshed. A reminder that even when men built cities and boasted of strength, God still saw the quiet value of a woman, the first named wife after Eve. A bridge between the mother of all living and the line that would lead to Noah, Abraham, and at last, Christ. This is the man if Scripture chose to keep her name alive. Perhaps her story is not small at all. Maybe the real question is this: what truth about womanhood, dignity, and God's design for humanity was being declared when Adah was remembered? Before we move on, declare this with me: I am adorned with God's favor. Now let's begin. What kind of world did Adah enter? It was not Eden, not paradise, not the garden her ancestors once walked. It was a world already shuddering under Cain's curse. Genesis 4 shows the scene. Cain, the restless wanderer, builds a city. His descendants rise, carrying gifts of music, craft, and invention. Yet alongside their brilliance came arrogance, violence, and pride. Out of Cain's line came Lamech, a man who boasted of bloodshed, who lifted his chest and declared, "If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold." These were not words of remorse. They were a shout of rebellion. It was the rise of a culture that glorified power, revenge, and domination. And still, Adah lived in that world. Her name rests quietly beside this man of violence. While Lamech bragged, her name was written, remembered, preserved in Genesis. Why? Perhaps to show that even in the darkest places, God lets a quiet light shine. That though sin grew great, the memory of one woman remained to prove not all in Cain's line was ruin, not all despair. Picture Adah's days. The clang of metal against metal in her home, as her sons forged tools and weapons. The strains of music drifting through the air as instruments were born from their family. Yet also the shadow of Lamech's wrath, a man whose pride spoke louder than his prayers. Adah's life was filled with paradox. She lived in a house of brilliance and invention, but also in a home marked by arrogance and blood. She raised children whose work shaped the world, yet she shared her table with a husband who gloried in violence. Still, her name survives. That is not by chance. Many women lived, gave birth, and died in those generations, yet their names remain unspoken. History of Adah, a name we often forget. But one God never did. Why then does Adah remain? Perhaps to show that at times God sets the gentle among the violent. Not to erase the violence, but to prove gentleness still has a witness. Not to glorify the sin of men, but to whisper that his gaze rests on the overlooked wife, the forgotten woman, the quiet name written in a chapter of fury. Adah's presence speaks to us. Even in a fallen world ruled by sin, God still chose to preserve dignity, beauty, and remembrance. Her name, Adah, means ornament, adornment, beauty. Set aside the ugliness of Lamech's arrogance, her name shines as a subtle contrast. And maybe that is the message. While the earth grows darker, God allows adornment to endure. While men boast of might, he records the names of women who bore quiet strength. Adah lived surrounded by violence, yet her very life became a testimony of dignity in the chaos. What does it mean when Scripture pauses to speak a name? Not every wife is remembered. Not every mother is written down. But in the shadow of Cain's line, the Spirit singled out one, Adah. Her name in Hebrew means ornament, adornment, beauty. And not the shallow beauty of glittering stones or golden trinkets, but the kind of beauty heaven itself acknowledges. A beauty untouched by passing fashion. A beauty that no violence of men could bury. Adah was more than a woman's face. She was a reminder that in a lineage of rebellion, God still leaves a jewel, a trace of his glory. While her husband Lamech shouted of revenge, God let Adah's name stand as a quiet protest against pride and brutality. Where his roar was loud, hers was written in stillness. Why? Because often the most powerful testimonies are not shouted from rooftops, but etched softly into memory. Adah's very name stands as a sign grace in the grip of violence, beauty among corruption, light flickering in the darkness of early mankind. And maybe that is the lesson. When the world is ugly, God still guards his adornments. Women who bear his reflection. Lives that shine like hidden gems in the dust of sin. Adah was that jewel, a reminder that while men declared war, heaven clothed the earth with grace. You may feel unseen. You may think your life is swallowed by the noise of others. But remember, Adah, her story was never told in detail, yet her name has glowed for thousands of years. What people forget, God adorns. Genesis shows us something sobering, something that breaks the harmony God first created. For the first time in Scripture, a man takes two wives. His name was Lamech. Their names Adah and Zillah. And here, the pattern shifts. Adam was given one wife. Noah, too, had one wife. Abraham, though later drawn into many unions, began with just one. But with Lamech, sin had already begun multiplying. What God had created as one, man now split into two. And inside that fracture stood two women, Adah, whose name means ornament, and Zillah, whose name whispers shadow or shade. Ornament and shadow. Beauty and veil. Light and covering. Picture the quiet tension of that household. Two women bound to one man's pride. Two voices echoing in the chambers of a covenant already broken. Maybe Adah, the first named, carried dignity, while Zillah lived in her shadow. Or maybe it was reversed. Scripture doesn't tell us, but the silence itself feels weighty. What is clear is this: the first polygamous marriage in Scripture is never presented as blessing, but as fracture. Lamech is remembered not for loyalty, but arrogance. Yet Adah's name remains, carved into history like a flower blooming in stone. Because even inside brokenness, God does not forget the individual. Where sin multiplies, his memory endures. He calls the unseen, the gentle, the overlooked by name. You may feel trapped inside a story of fracture, where promises broke, where love divided. But if God remembered Adah, caught in the shadow of polygamy, then he remembers you too. Even inside brokenness, your name is safe with him. From Adah's womb came not only children, but the first sparks of culture. Genesis records their names with care, Jabal and Jubal. Jabal, called father of those who dwell in tents and keep herds. He was the pioneer of shepherding, of building movable homes, of learning to live close to the earth, following grass and sky. Through him, humanity learned how to sustain life beyond Cain's curse of the soil. He gave the world the image of wanderers, tent dwellers moving with their flocks like rivers. Then Jubal, father of all who play the lyre and the pipe. Through him, sound itself became an offering. Jubal tied notes together and gave the world music, the first melodies carrying joy and sorrow, praise and lament. From his mother's line came the rhythm of worship, the song of remembrance, the poetry of the heart. Notice these inventors, these culture shapers, came not from Zillah, but from Adah. Scripture is intentional in tying their beginnings to her. The ornament, the one adorned by God, became the vessel through which the world was adorned with tents, herds, and music. Her sons carried forward not weapons, but tools of living and beauty. Why is that detail preserved? Because often the most overlooked mothers raise the children who change history. Adah is remembered not for conquest, but for birthing quiet revolutions of culture shelter, sustenance, and song. You may feel hidden, overshadowed, even erased. But like Adah, you may be carrying inside you what the world desperately needs. God often entrusts his greatest gifts to those the world forgets. The mother who bore culture shapers is remembered by God, and so will you. Long before Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, there were mothers whose names marked beginnings. Scripture whispers their names almost in passing, yet they stand at the dawn of civilization itself. Eve, Adah, and Zillah. Eve, the mother of all living, bore the weight of the fall and the hope of redemption. Her name echoes with life and tragedy as she held Cain and Abel, Seth, and more. She reminds us that motherhood began as a divine calling, carrying both joy and anguish. Then came Adah, not the first woman, but the first wife to be named after Eve. Her life bridged the story between Eden and the rise of culture. Through her sons came tents, herds, and music, the pulse of human life. If Eve's motherhood symbolized life itself, Adah's symbolized the shaping of civilization. She adorned humanity not just with children, but with the tools to dwell, to sustain, and to sing. Zillah, her companion in Lamech's household, is remembered too, but not in the same way. Her children, Tubal-Cain and Naamah, brought craft and beauty, yet Scripture gives greater weight to Adah's line. This is no accident. Out of two mothers, one is lifted, one becomes the channel of remembrance. This is not favoritism, it is revelation. God shows us that names endure not because of human titles, but because he inscribes them into eternity. Eve is remembered for bearing the first life. Adah is remembered for carrying the beginnings of culture. Zillah, though present, fades quietly into the background. And here lies a haunting truth history forgets, but God records. What human eyes dismiss, heaven seals in memory. The world remembers kings and warriors, but God remembers mothers who pitched tents, who raised sons, who gave birth to music. You may never stand in front of crowds, never wear a crown, never appear in history's pages. But heaven writes names differently. Adah's legacy whispers that what you carry, what you build, and what you bring into the world matters beyond recognition. God himself writes names into his story. Every family has shadows. And for the line of Cain, the shadow was not just memory, it was curse. A mark, a story, a wound that followed through generations. Imagine growing up as a child of Adah or Zillah, hearing in hushed tones that your great ancestor killed his own brother, that your bloodline bore the words God once spoke, a fugitive and a wanderer you shall be. Yet here is the paradox, out of this cursed family came invention, culture, and progress. From Adah's children came tents and herds, melody and music. From Zillah's line came craftsmanship with bronze and iron. They were builders of life, even though their ancestor had taken life. Civilization itself grew out of fractured soil. The Bible does not hide this tension. It reveals that God, in mystery, can draw beauty from ashes, can raise songs out of a family marked by sin. This is grace in its rawest form, redemption rising where judgment once fell. Adah's children flourished, not because the curse was small, but because God's providence is greater than every curse. Cain's shadow stretched far, but it could not block out the light of God's mercy. Where sin spread, grace still wrote a new ending. Maybe you too feel weighed down by a past you didn't choose, by family history, by mistakes that weren't yours, by shadows you inherited. Adah's story whispers from eternity-broken roots can still bear good fruit. Redemption is not canceled by bloodlines. God delights in creating life where death once ruled. In Scripture, names are never wasted. They are windows, prophecies, burdens, and blessings carried in a single word. Adah means ornament, adornment, beauty, yet not shallow beauty, but a beauty preserved for remembrance. In the ancient world, adornment was more than decoration. It marked identity. Jewelry spoke covenant, garments spoke tribe, veils spoke of honor. Adornment said, "This is who I am, this is what I belong to, this is what I carry." Women especially were seen not just as bearers of beauty, but as keepers of memory, carriers of wisdom, vessels of culture. Adah, then, is more than a wife of Lamech. She is a sign, a living ornament in the story of Genesis. In the long shadow of Cain's curse, she stands as a radiant contrast, her name declaring that even in the darkest soil, God still plants beauty. Even in fractured households, his glory glimmers like hidden jewels. Her sons embodied her name. Jabal's tents, adornment upon the wilderness. Jubal's music, adornment upon silence. Living ornament upon a cursed line, proof that God can place beauty where none is deserved. Perhaps this is Adah's hidden prophecy that God stores glory in the places no one expects. In families scarred by failure. In women overlooked by history. In names that seem small. Adah reminds us that in God's eyes, no life slips into insignificance. He decorates his story with hidden jewels, and often those jewels are the very people the world overlooks. Genesis never wastes ink. Every name, every child, every mother written carries a purpose. And within the household of Lamech, two women stand side by side, Adah and Zillah. Both raised children who shaped history, yet their legacies tell very different tales. Adah, whose name means ornament, became the mother of Jabal and Jubal. One pioneered tents and shepherding, the other brought forth music and melody. Through them, life was softened with beauty, rhythm, and art. They adorned existence itself. Zillah, however, gave birth to Tubal-Cain, master of bronze and iron. His craft fashioned tools of survival plows for the field, but also weapons for war. His strength brought progress, yet strength without song always risks turning into tyranny. Placed side by side, the mothers paint a contrast. One offered culture for the soul, the other gave the world instruments of power. Both contributions mattered, but one nourishes while the other dominates. Notice how Scripture preserves two sons of Adah by name, while Zillah is given only one. Perhaps that quiet detail hints at a truth that art, music, and the spirit outlive even the strongest metal. Tools corrode, weapons break, but melody continues to echo through generations. Adah and Zillah were more than wives of Lamech, they are archetype symbols of two directions humanity can take. To adorn life with culture and beauty, or to adorn survival with iron and fire. God records both, yet he elevates one. Adah's legacy declares that faith, culture, and beauty outlast empires built on strength. What clothes the soul always outshines what arms the sword. When Genesis introduces Adah and Zillah, it does more than mention women. It reveals the birth of polygamy. Lamech was the first man to shatter Eden's covenant of oneness. Adam had one Eve. Lamech took two wives. And with that choice, something broke. Imagine the tension inside that household. Two women, two hearts, tied to one man's pride. Love split, devotion divided, affection rationed. For Adah, every moment Lamech spent with Zillah may have felt stolen. For Zillah, every child born to Adah may have carried the sting of rivalry. Polygamy did not multiply love, it fractured it. This marks the beginning of broken family patterns in Scripture. From this point forward, we will see households torn apart by rivalry. Sarah and Hagar, Rachel and Leah, Hannah and Peninnah. Each story breeds jealousy, sorrow, and the ache of women forced into something God never intended. And yet, even here, grace threads its way through. Out of jealousy rise nations. Out of rivalry emerge songs. Out of fractured homes come prophets, kings, and even the Messiah himself. God does not approve of the fracture, but he redeems it. He does not erase the ache, but he etches his promises even into wounded households. Adah bore the pain of sharing her husband. Zillah bore the sting of comparison. And still, God remembered their names. They are not just wives of a proud man. They stand as symbols of human hearts under strain, living proof that where sin multiplies, grace abounds even more. Their story carries both warning and hope. Sin splits what God designed as whole, but divine destiny is never broken. Even homes divided cannot divide God's plan. Into this fragile family comes one of the first recorded poems in the Bible, and it is not worship, not thanksgiving, but violence. Lamech turns to his wives, Adah and Zillah, and declares, "Hear my voice, listen to my words." It is not tender speech, but intimidation. He boasts of killing a man for striking him, of taking vengeance 77 times over. His words drip with arrogance, a twisted echo of God's promise to Cain. Where God once spoke mercy, Lamech turned it into defiance. He wrapped bloodshed in poetry, turning brutality into art. But pause for a moment and picture Adah. Her name remains because God intended for it to be written. But what does that mean for us today? Especially for women who feel invisible, passed over, or forgotten. Adah reminds us that true remembrance isn't measured by crowds or applause, but by quiet faithfulness. The world may never record your voice, your sacrifices, or your tears, but heaven does. God looked upon a woman named Adah, and through her he shaped generations. Her story belongs to every woman who has lived in the shadows while others were celebrated. To every mother whispering unseen prayers for her children. To every wife carrying burdens no one else notices. Adah's life speaks softly, you are not overlooked. You are seen. You are cherished in the records of heaven. The legacy of Adah is this: history often erases women's names, but God never does. In his story, even the faintest names glow like stars against the dark sky of human pride. Adah's name in Hebrew means adornment, to be set apart, to be prepared, to be made beautiful. She was the very first wife ever recorded in Scripture, a woman whose name hinted at being clothed and adorned. And centuries later, in the last pages of the Bible, that same image appears again. This time not about one woman, but about the bride of Christ. John in Revelation wrote, "I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Do you hear it? The echo of Adah's name in the destiny of the church. What began as a quiet mention in Genesis blossoms into a cosmic vision in Revelation. Adah, standing in the shadow of Cain's descendants, became a faint foreshadow of a greater bride not bound by sin, rivalry, or pride, but clothed in righteousness for her true bridegroom, Christ. What the world dismissed as small, one forgotten woman's name, God enlarged into a symbol of eternal beauty. What looks minor in Genesis is magnified in Revelation. What looks overlooked in the beginning becomes honored in the end. Adah's name declares this: God always finishes what he begins. And his bride, like Adah, will be adorned, remembered, and radiant forever. But here lies the hidden warning. Culture can shape faith as much as faith can shape culture. Jubal's harp could lift men into worship, or it could lead them into idolatry. Tubal-Cain's tools could build altars of sacrifice, or they could forge weapons of destruction. What Adah's children created was powerful, but power without God becomes dangerous. The pattern continues even now. We build towers of technology, empires of wealth, and kingdoms of influence. But the question remains, is God at the foundation, or have we left him behind? Whatever we build without God will eventually collapse, but what is built with him will endure forever. Adah's story whispers through time. Even humanity's greatest achievements mean nothing if they are not anchored in the eternal. If God could adorn Adah's life in such a violent world, what could he do with yours? If he remembered her name in Genesis, will he not also remember you in your unseen struggles? This is more than history. It is a warning, and it is a promise. A warning that anything built without God crumbles. A promise that what we give into his hands lasts forever. But here is the challenge. Will your life be remembered by the world or remembered by heaven? Will your name fade on stones or be inscribed in the book of life? If this story has stirred something within you, don't just scroll past, act on it. Comment below these words, "I will not be forgotten by God." Subscribe so you never miss another hidden truth the world has overlooked. And share this video, because if you stay silent, who will remind others that God remembers the forgotten? The first wife remembered by name proves that God never forgets his adornments. Thank you for watching. God bless you. This is Black Faith Tales.